See, I knew this was coming. I knew Google would eventually cancel the Stadia sooner or later. To me, it wasn't a question of if Google would cancel it, but a question of when they would cancel it. I remember years ago when Google announced the Stadia, and I remember thinking to myself along the lines of, what? Again? Another streaming-only gaming experience? Just like the cancelled OnLive. Does anybody remember the OnLive? Anybody? Anyone else? Oh. But anyways, when I heard about the announcement of the Google Stadia, I didn't pay any mind to it. Never been interested, and I paid no interest to any of the Stadia news. Ever. And I still don't. My main focus has always been my gaming PC, and to observe the console war of the PlayStation 5 versus the Xbox Series X and S. I myself don't have a PS5 or an Xbox, I don't, but I think observing this console war is very interesting and always has been in my subjective opinion. When it comes to the gaming scene, it has always been the battle of the giants. I remember years ago in my teens when Wikipedia and YouTube were relatively new. I found out, thanks to these aforementioned sites, that both Sega and Nintendo in the 1990s used to do what Sony and Microsoft was doing back in my teens. A console war. But you know something? Back then, in the 1990s, there used to be competitors besides Sega and Nintendo that wanted in on those console money, like the Philips CDI or the Panasonic 3DO. But most people don't talk about the CDI and the 3DO when it comes to the console war of Sega versus Nintendo. Why? You see, it's because, and this is only my takeaway of all of it, the way I interpret the console wars back then, and my takeaway to why the CDI and the 3DO isn't ever mentioned could be because I think because of the fact that the CDI was released in 1990, back then the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis were the hardest selling consoles back then, and when the CDI released, people back then didn't seem to care or even notice about it, and for a while the CDI was a sleeper console with no must-have releases, at least not at the time. I mean, why buy a console from a company that doesn't have any past history with gaming development? And besides, people back then were already into the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis to even notice or care about the CDI, it seems. But then, around in either 1992 or 1994, somebody please correct me in the comment section, but anyways, around that time, Nintendo cut ties with Sony to produce a CD-based add-on for the Super Nintendo, which is known by a lot of people as the Nintendo PlayStation. Nintendo cut their ties with Sony because Sony said that they wanted a profit for every CD sold. And so Nintendo changed their minds, and Nintendo went with Philips instead. And so Nintendo licensed their games to Philips' sleeper console, the CDI. One Mario game and 3 Zelda games, and 99% of the people universally agrees that the Nintendo CDI games are objectively bad. Understandably. And so, the Philips CDI, even to this day, didn't leave much of an impression on gamers back then, or rather, I should be saying, the Philips CDI's legacy, its last impression on the world, are YouTube poops and memes. Just type in on Know Your Meme, CDI, and yeah. That's the way a lot of people remember the CDI as a failure. As for the Panasonic 3DO, well, unlike the Philips CDI, the 3DO actually did pretty good for itself. Mostly in Japan, I should be saying. Now, there have been many Western products that tried to capitalize on the Japanese market, but only to fail, like Microsoft's Xbox consoles. You can look up a list of sales for the Xbox 360, the Xbox One, and yeah, you'll see that the Xbox brand over there in Japan isn't that well received over there. Xbox is basically small in Japan. However, the same can't be said about the 3DO. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, would you believe me if I told you that the 3DO, a Western product from 1993, had quite a decent following in Japan, unlike the West? Yes, the 3DO was one of those Western products that was big in Japan, it seems. Or so I've heard. I mean, if you have a different 3DO model and more games over there versus what the West got, then I guess you could categorize the 3DO as sort of big in Japan, I think. But anyways, there was another dilemma to why the 3DO didn't last very long. People back then, in 1993, already had their eyes peeled on the up-and-coming next generation of consoles. A lot of people were looking forward to Sega's then up-and-coming Sega Saturn and Nintendo's then up-and-coming Nintendo 64. But that's all ancient history now. For nowadays, it's Sony versus Microsoft, and it has been since the mid-2000s. And what I am really trying to say with this history lesson with, I don't want to sound like Blackball now, but with these pieces of plastic, is there's been console wars even before Sony and Microsoft, and even back then, there were those who wanted to try their hand at the console scene, like Philips and Panasonic, two companies with little to no experience with games, toys or video games as a whole. Sega and Nintendo back then were already well-recognized gaming brands, and so a lot of people played it safe and stuck with either of the two. Even back then, a lot of people, a lot of gamers, had a sense of brand recognition and loyalty to their favorite piece of plastic. Again, Black Bond. But no, enough about the past and more about what I'm trying to convey. What I'm trying to say with all of this is, I knew that the Google Stadia would not compete against the PS5 and the Xbox Series. Heck, I was also very certain that the Google Stadia wouldn't even compete against the Nintendo Switch. I mean, does Google have their own cute little revolutionary IP or mascot that Sony and Nintendo or Microsoft does not? No, I actually don't think so. Not to my knowledge anyways. That is another reason why the Philips CDI failed, why the Panasonic 3DO failed, why the Ouya failed, and why the Google Stadia failed. And now the Google Stadia will go down in history and join the choir of the other failed consoles like the Nokia N-Gage and the OnLive, if anybody remember those two. Which I don't think many people remember, but oh well. And so, I guess I'll cap off today's podvid by saying, good riddance to bad rubbish to the Google Stadia. Those who do not learn from the past are doomed to repeat that.